offering smart security systems to homes and businesses. Call Goldilocks at 708-889-5600.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here, and perhaps the last, 5 decades of scaring us with ecological catastrophe stories is part of the explanation to the question, why are Americans not having kids? Not at replacement rate, at least. We have immigrants doing the jobs Americans don't want to do and having the kids they don't want to have. But maybe the ecological apocalypse that has been predicted for these many decades is part of it. Certainly that's what you hear when you listen to ignoramuses like AOC prattle on about why have kids when if we don't eliminate fossil fuels, the planet will cease to exist, will collapse on itself like a dying star by 2030. And no matter how often they're wildly wrong, the end times predictions continue unabated. I mean, really, go back. This isn't just, an Al Gorean phenomenon, although Al Gore was featured in this 1982 report by Dan Rather, venerable newsman Dan Rather. Yeah. The propagandizing has been going on long before the cable news channels, hasn't it?
Concern about rising temperatures on planet Earth heated up a hearing here in Washington today. For years, scientists have theorized about the dangers of the so-called greenhouse effect, the warming of the Earth's atmosphere due to the burning of coal and oil. And in recent months, as David Culhane reports, research has uncovered facts to support that theory.
Many scientists claim that the temperature of the Earth's atmosphere has been rising over the past 100 years, that the great sheets of pack ice in Antarctica are melting at a much more rapid rate than previously. And finally, that the sea level has been rising with increasing swiftness over the past 40 years. If these scientists are correct, about 25% of Florida would be flooded, along with low-lying areas all over the world. Climate changes could produce widespread disruption of agriculture. The American farm belt might be too dry, and the wheat and corn crops would have to move to Canada. Scientists blame the odorless, colorless carbon dioxide gas for these potentially dangerous changes around the planet. It is the greenhouse effect. The gas allows sunlight to filter down and warm the Earth. But like the glass of a greenhouse, the carbon dioxide tends to trap heat so that it cannot rise into space. The scientists maintain that the coal, oil, and gas we've been burning for 100 years have produced more and more carbon dioxide and helped overheat the Earth. Now, some political leaders endorse the demands for more CO2 monitoring stations, like this one in Hawaii. And they share the anger of the scientists at Reagan administration budget cuts at a time when they feel closer to getting definitive answers.
We are not doing the kind of research that we should be doing to determine whether or not these scientists who are so alarmed are correct in their assessment.
And what they find out will affect the lives and fortunes of millions of people, the very survival of cities like this one. David Culhane, CBS News, New York.
Yeah, standing at Hudson Bay. The survival of New York. 25% of Florida will be flooded. And, of course, in the intervening 4 decades, Florida has become a population job development magnet. I've got some swampland in Florida to sell you. Went from a punchline to the reality. I've got some swampland. You could put a housing development in a golf course and bundle the membership, and people will come. But it's not, so this is not so much about the same old story that they have been telling for so many generations about ecological disasters. And it's also not to be willy-nilly about them, but it's just all the hysterics. The best part of that 2-minute report, which we've been hammered with again, decade after decade after decade, no matter how accurate those predictions, modeling turned out to be. The scientists, this monolithic group of scientists that shall never be named. It's just this generic group of scientists. You're not going to challenge the scientists, are you? The scientists say this and the scientists say that. There's one opinion held by all of those who call themselves scientists. When, of course, that's not the fact. That's sort of the most insidious aspect of the propagandizing that's done by people like the Legacy News, we call them now. But there is a real issue with population and population growth. If you're not growing, you're dying. And, we're not growing families. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Dean Spears, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Texas at Austin. Also, co-author of After the Spike, Population, Progress, and the Case for People, the alternative case. Dean Spears, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So we know Paul Ehrlich was spectacularly wrong and the population bomb was a dud. And in part, that's because he didn't understand, apparently, that food grows geometrically, food production does, and population grows exponentially. And so it's not quite what Malthus understood would come to pass. But it turns out that so the population bomb was a dud, but we have a depopulation bomb, which is sort of the title of a piece that the Wall Street Journal did, in part on the basis of your work and the work of a colleague, Michael Garuso. Tell us about it.
So right now, the most likely future for the world's population is global depopulation, where generation after generation gets smaller than what came before. And you mentioned the population bomb in Ehrlich, and we have all been hearing a story for decades where the main worry is overpopulation. The size of the world's population would grow unendingly without bounds. But in fact, all along, while the world's population has been growing, the birth rate, the average number of children, has been falling. Now, to start with where we are, for thousands of years, the size of the world population didn't change very much. There were about 5 million of us at the beginning of the Common Era, roughly the population of Metro Atlanta. But a few hundred years ago, humanity got better at keeping one another alive, and especially at keeping children alive. That's mainly because of the germ theory of disease, sanitation, antibiotics, nutrition. And so as children began to be more likely to survive, the children who were born, the size of the population began growing quickly to about 1 billion of us in 1800, doubling in the century after that, and quadrupling in the century after that to our present, a little bit more than 8 billion people. But that's projected to change soon. The central projection of the demographers at the United Nations is that within the lifetime of a child born today, say in the 2080s, the size of the world population is going to peak and then begin to decline. No major demographic forecasts really expect anything different. The other population scientist groups, if anything, put the peak even sooner. And once we hit this decline, once humanity begins to grow smaller, the downslope could be every bit as fast and every bit as exponential as the upslope. One way of looking at it is that the average birth rate in the United States right now is 1.6 kids per 2 adults on average, and Europe is a little bit lower than 1.5. But if the whole world were to average 1.5, which is not that much lower than the US today, then our numbers would fall by close to 10% per decade, or by about 2/3 per century. And so the question that we're trying to raise in our book, After the Spike, is that a future to welcome, or should we instead be working towards an alternative future where the size of the population stabilizes at some good level?
And just for context, right? As I understand it, replacement rate is you said we're at 1.6. Replacement rate is 2.1. Is that right?
That's right. The United States is at 1.6. The world as a whole is at 2.3. Where I teach in Texas is at 1.8. But other U.S. states are even lower. Vermont, for example, is around 1.4. No U.S. state, every U.S. state has fallen below this level of 2. Even places with higher birth rates like Oklahoma or Utah or Kansas, every U.S. state has fallen below 2 at some point. Now, I said 2, you said 2.1. They're not very different. The truth is that there's no one-size-fits-all answer for the average number of births that would stabilize the population, in part because it depends on the infant mortality rate, in part because it depends on how many boys and girls are born. But if it's below 2, I mean, you can sort of think of the basic biology of where people come from. If it's below 2 births per 2 adults on average, then we can be pretty sure that the population is going to get smaller. And 2/3 of countries already are below this 2 births per 2 adults.
Well, and so, so part of this is what the demographics look like in terms of the populations that are growing at or above replacement rate and the populations that are not. But more just generally, as you were referencing, I don't want to get into the business of some of these climate alarmists who are telling us what the world is going to look like in 2070 if we don't eliminate fossil fuels, and it's all based on models and theories and maybe just sentimentality. It's hard to say. But so you're talking about 2080 and on this track and 10% generation after generation. Why should we be terribly concerned about it now? It seems like, maybe if things get a little bit more materially comfortable for a wider swath of Americans over time, then people will have more kids. Or if we reorient our culture a little bit more towards family, then people will get married earlier again and have more kids. So, I mean, it's just maybe we don't need to think about sort of a larger a cultural focus on this, because if we just make some minor adjustments and get the right political leadership, then things will take care of themselves.
I want to pick out at least 3 parts of that to talk about, because there's so much here that's interesting. One is your question of why now. One is the question you brought up about affordability. And another thing you brought up is age of marriage. And I think each of those are something interesting to dive into. So on the question of why now, I think to some extent, I agree with what you're saying, that it's not going to make anything better to say that this is the sort of urgent crisis where we need to throw out thoughtfulness and just start rapidly making changes, start passing laws. It's not the time to be rapidly making changes or passing laws. It's the time to be starting a conversation and looking ahead to the future, so that we don't have to declare an urgent crisis and be careless, but we can get more people involved in reflecting, are we headed on the path that we want? Or since there are still decades since there are decades ahead of us, would it be better to be moving towards something else? So I completely agree that what we need to do right now is start the research, start the social science, start the conversation, start having discussions like this one. A lot of people still believe that we're on the path to a population that's going to grow and grow without ending. And so the first step is getting people to update their facts and see that that's not the case and the birth rates have been falling. And a lot of people, when they find out that the most likely future is global depopulation, is to say, oh, well, that's clearly something to welcome. That's going to solve our problems. And I think that's also a perspective that we need to confront. And as we have conversations like this one, I think more people will start to say maybe stabilization would be a future worth working towards. And at that point, we'll hopefully also have more of the evidence base that would have us looking for solutions. So you're right. It's now is not the time necessarily to act so much as it's the time to think and talk and learn. Well,
but to that point that you were just referencing, should we even worry about depopulation? Because, a couple billion fewer people and, there's less garbage at Yosemite and we're better stewards of our environment and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think so. That's one of the first responses we get, that a smaller population would be something to welcome to solve our environmental problems. And you can, garbage at Yosemite. You've mentioned climate change, and it's true that people do polluting things, and people have caused environmental problems. But the question is whether fewer people is the solution to those environmental problems, especially fewer people right now at this point in history. The thing is, the population is a large ship, slow to turn, and almost anything that might change birth rates to any feasible degree, even if it magically started right away, just isn't going to cause a very big deviation in the most likely path of the world's population for the coming few decades. So any conversation we're having is about what sort of future we would want after the population peaks or spikes and begins to decline. But for the coming decades, the population is going to keep growing. So, if a child is born today, that child might be deciding whether or not to have kids 20 years from now, 30 years from now, decades in the future, which is after the sorts of targets and deadlines that we hear about for climate challenges. So the first reason that depopulation isn't going to be any sort of solution to environmental challenges is that it just comes too slow or too late. But there's another reason, which is that where humanity has made progress against environmental challenges before, it's never been by shrinking the population. So, in the 80s, when I was a kid, I heard about the hole in the ozone layer from chlorofluorocarbons. I've got 2 kids. They didn't make the hole in the ozone layer any worse because they were born in the last few years, and humanity has more or less ended the use of CFCs through the Montreal Protocol in 1987. My kids didn't add any lead to the atmosphere from driving around in leaded gasoline cars because we ended leaded gasoline in the 1970s with the Clean Air Act. The way that humanity has made progress against its environmental challenges in the past has always been by changing what people do. And that's, what we would have to do again. It's not about having fewer people.
Dean Spears is Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Texas at Austin, co-author of After the Spike, Population, Progress, and the Case for People. Professor Spears, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
A great smile can make you feel happy and confident. So when you consciously conserve your teeth, that glowing smile will show through.